Resident incorporated entities. How to register for tax in Nigeria. Part 1. Dear friend, the Nigerian Tax Acts require every resident incorporated entity, RIE, comprising various types of incorporated companies and incorporated corporates, which are under the jurisdiction of the Nigeria National Tax Authority, the Nigerian Revenue Service, NRS, to register for tax immediately. They are incorporated by the Corporate Affairs Commission, CAC. In addition, the Nigerian Tax Acts require every resident incorporated entity to file their annual tax returns on or before the last day of the 6 months following the end of the accounting year or financial year. Incidentally, the accounting year end or financial year end of most resident incorporated entities is June. 30th June 2026 is around the corner. Consequently, every resident incorporated entity has to file their annual tax return on or before 30th June 2026, timely and properly. Failure to do so attracts severe consequences, sanctions, and penalties that run into millions of naira. Certainly, you or your incorporated entity do not wish to incur such unnecessary penalties and losses. However, while some resident incorporated entities clearly and strongly know how to register for tax and file their tax returns timely and properly, some do not know. It is for the benefit of those who do not know, those who want to have a refresh, and those who desire to avoid the severe penalties that accrue from improper and non-timely registration for tax and filing of tax returns that we thought it necessary to do this video. This video, though captioned a step-by-step professional guide, is vastly extensive, comprehensive, and intensive. This is because before you know the largely mechanical step-by-step process by which resident incorporated entities register for tax and file their tax returns, you have to deeply and clearly understand what resident incorporated entities are, what makes them resident incorporated entities, their nature and characteristics, including tax rights and obligations. Frankly speaking, for you to deeply and clearly comprehend resident incorporated entities and all about them and tax processes, we have to provide you with all that you need to do that. This is why we broke down this particular tax education and enlightenment program into two parts, part 1 and part 2. In this part 1, you will get to know or refresh your memory of the golden rule of tax freedom. Then we will provide you with the fundamental meaning of a resident incorporated entity, RIE. We will go ahead and provide you with the golden rule of taxation of resident incorporated entities to enable you know where you and your company or entity stand, either resident or non-resident. Before we go ahead and explain to you the statutory and practice meaning of resident incorporated entity and their tax implications and benefits, we will first of all discuss which persons the Nigerian Tax Act stipulate are either taxable or non-taxable to Nigerian tax. Again, so that you will know where you stand. And we will tell you more about your status as resident incorporated entity or a non-resident incorporated entity, your tax implications, and how to comply. So what do? Simple. Just follow us attentively to the end of this video. In addition, we will be releasing more videos, and to get the videos hot and fresh, kindly like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and share to as many people as possible. Also, please, let us know how you are benefiting from our tax educational and enlightenment programs through our videos. Thanks. Now, what will you learn in this video? In this part 1 of the tax registration mechanism of resident incorporated entities, RIEs, you obtain valuable knowledge about what they are, benefit for timely registration and proper registration, and consequences for failure to register for tax, amongst others. So you're going to learn the following. You're going to learn or refresh your memory about the golden rule of tax freedom, the fundamental meaning of a resident incorporated entity, RIE, in Nigeria, the golden rule of taxation of resident incorporated entities, RIEs, in Nigeria, Persons obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, also called taxable persons. Description, characteristics, and examples of taxable persons. Description, characteristics, and examples of non-taxable persons. Definition, description, and uses of tax ID, the primary product of tax registration. Important notes on the operationality of tax ID. More incisive and critical information about tax ID. Key implications and benefits for timely and proper registration for tax in Nigeria. Sanctions and penalties for failure to register for tax in Nigeria, timely and properly. The two types of taxable persons and the relevant tax authorities. Explanations of the two types of taxable persons and their relevant tax authorities. About Taxcorp and the principal consultant. The golden rule of tax freedom, very important for you. Dear friend, do you want to be free from tax wahala? No disturbance of your sleep by a taxman? No knocking at your door by a tax lady? No receipt of long queries by your business from a tax controller? No receipt of unsolicited reminders or threats by your company? No blocking of your bank accounts by the tax chairman? No debiting of your bank account at the directive of a tax authority? No barging into you or your business by law enforcement officers? No forceful entry into your business premises by tax officers and law enforcement officers? No threat of imprisonment by a law court? No selling of your business and or its assets without a court order after the tax has become final and conclusive by the Nigerian Revenue Service, NRS? Dear friend, if your answer to the above compound question is a capital yes, then obey the golden rule of tax freedom and you ask, what is this golden rule of tax freedom? And we tell you it is called the 3 C's. And you ask, what is 3 C's? It is simple. Comply, comply, and comply. So, what's the fundamental meaning of a resident incorporated entity, RIE? Simply put, a resident incorporated entity, RIE, is an entity which the Nigerian Tax Acts deemed to be resident in Nigeria. That's simple. I repeat, simply put, a resident incorporated entity, RIE, is an entity which the Nigerian Tax Acts deemed to be resident in Nigeria, though not specifically defined by the Nigerian Tax Act. The Nigerian Tax Act, NTA 2025, defines two categories of companies in Nigeria, and they are Nigerian companies and foreign companies. Section 202 of NTA 2025 defines a foreign company as follows: a non-resident company or any company other than a Nigerian company. Repeat, NTA defines a foreign company as a non-resident company or any company other than a Nigerian company. Therefore, by extension, a Nigerian company is a company resident in Nigeria other than a foreign company. Consequently, a resident incorporated entity is an IE that is resident in Nigeria, and by definition, by the Tax Act of a foreign company, is a Nigerian company. Section 202 of NTA 25 defines a Nigerian company as a company. What this? Defines a Nigerian company as a company formed, registered, or incorporated under any law in Nigeria. A company whose central place of management or control is Nigeria, or a company whose effective place of management or control is Nigeria. Please note that an incorporated entity is an artificial entity formed by persons, created and registered by law, with a perpetual life that is separate and distinct from those who formed it. And that a resident incorporated entity is an artificial entity formed by persons, created and registered by law, with a perpetual life that is separate and distinct from those who formed it, and which is deemed resident in Nigeria by the Nigerian Tax Acts. Consequently, resident incorporated entities comprise the various forms or types of companies and other corporate bodies. Companies include limited liability companies, limited by shares or limited by guarantee, private and public, quoted and unquoted, other corporate bodies, including educational institutions, religious organizations, charitable organizations, cooperative societies, associations and clubs, and others. which are usually under the tax jurisdiction of the Nigerian Revenue Service. Now, the golden rule of taxation of resident incorporated entities in Nigeria. Please pay attention because you need to know this. The golden rule of taxation of resident incorporated entities in Nigeria is that a resident incorporated entity is deemed to be resident in Nigeria or is a Nigerian company, and by this classification, its global income is subject to tax in Nigeria. Its global income is subject to tax in Nigeria, no matter where they arise and whether or not they are brought into or received in Nigeria. This is the principle of taxation of global income of a resident person in Nigeria, where, however, the income has suffered tax in a foreign company, in a foreign country. Due adjustments will be made for double taxation under the Nigerian Tax Act. I repeat, where, however, the income has suffered tax in a foreign country for which Nigeria has double taxation arrangement, due adjustments will be made for double taxation under the Nigerian Tax Acts. Persons obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, also called taxable persons. Section 4 of the Nigerian Tax Administration Act, NTAA 2025, states that every taxable person shall register with the relevant tax authority and obtain taxpayer identification, tax ID, for the purpose of compliance with tax obligations. So, every person who is a taxable person is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria and obtain a tax ID. Put in another way, a taxable person is a person who is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. Please note the definition, the defining words of taxation in Nigeria. And these are taxable persons. So, the key question in chargeability to tax and registration for tax in Nigeria is, what this? Are you a taxable person? If you are not a taxable person in Nigeria, you don't pay tax. You don't have anything to do with tax in Nigeria. And therefore, you are not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria if you are not a taxable person. But once you are a taxable person, please note this, in Nigeria, you are obligated to register for tax in Nigeria immediately without wasting time. So it's important you know your tax status, whether your chargeability or taxability status in Nigeria. Also, as it goes on, the natural question everybody will want to know is, so who is a taxable person in Nigeria? And to answer this question, we will go to the next slide. Here is about the description, characteristics, and examples of taxable persons. Who are taxable persons or who is a taxable person in Nigeria? We have seen section 4 of NTAA 2025, which states that every taxable person shall register with the relevant tax authority and obtain a taxpayer identification, that's tax ID, for the purpose of compliance with tax obligations. The natural question then is, who is a taxable person in Nigeria? Well, section 147 of NTAA 2025 comes to our rescue. Section 147 of NTAA 2025 states that taxable person means, please watch this now, taxable person means person who carries out economic activity in a place or a person exploiting tangible or intangible property for the purpose of obtaining income therefrom by way of trade or business or agency of government acting in that capacity. It's very important I repeat it for you. Taxable person means person who carries out economic activity in a place or a person exploiting tangible or intangible property for the purpose of obtaining income therefrom by way of trade or business or an agency of government acting in that capacity. By simply combining the definition of a person who is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria and the definition of a taxable person according to the Tax Act, we arrive at a comprehensive, clear, certain, and simple description of what is or who is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, and that is every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, whether or not for profit or gain, is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. Watch it again. Every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, whether or not for profit or gain, is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. Again, simply put, every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, whether or not for profit or gain, is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. We will show you what constitutes an economic activity herein. In the meantime, we arrive at the above description of who is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria from the following provisions of the Nigerian Tax Acts and commercial practice. An economic activity by commercial practice is a broader activity which includes production, distribution, and consumption of goods or services to earn a living or satisfy human need, including the exchange of money for goods or services. Please note that an economic activity is different from a business activity, which is a specific subset of economic activities that are aimed at making profit or gain. Consequently, while all business activities are economic activities, not all economic activities are business activities. Please know that a taxable person is different from a taxed person or taxpayer. A taxable person is someone who is subject to tax, whether or not they are liable to pay. A tax person is a taxable person who is obligated to pay tax. By the above stated comprehensive and simple description of a taxable person, every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, whether or not for profit or gain, is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. And they include, please watch this list. Every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria for profit or gain, and they include traders, low-income earners, enterprises, partnerships, MSMEs, incorporated companies, and corporates are taxable persons. Every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, but not for profit or gain, and they include non-governmental organizations, NGOs, schools, cooperative societies, charitable organizations, religious organizations, they are taxable persons. Every person who earns, derives, or receives income from current or past employment, including current and past employees, pensioners, are taxable persons. Every person who earns, derives, or receives income from current or past investment, including active and present, past and passive investors, they are taxable persons. Every ministry, department, or agency of federal or state government and every local government which shall register and obtain a tax ID. Every trust, estate, community, executor, liquidator, etc., which earns, derives, or receives income, profits, or gains from Nigeria. Every non-resident person that supplies taxable goods or services to any person in Nigeria is a taxable person. Every non-resident person that earns or derives income from Nigeria, which are registered for tax and obtain a tax ID, is a taxable person. Every person who is obligated to deduct, withhold, or remit any tax, including withholding tax, payee, etc., and remit such to a tax authority is a taxable person. Every person who is obligated to charge, collect, or remit any tax, VAT, etc. Every person who is appointed to charge, deduct, collect, or remit any tax. Every person who is appointed to represent a taxpayer, incorporated and unincorporated entities, self-employed persons, business owners, contractors, consultants, they are all taxable persons. Bodies of individuals, including families, communities, associations, clubs, public and private employees, directors, expatriates, they are all taxable persons. Civil servants, public servants, politicians, National Assembly, senators, House of Rep, they are all taxable persons. Business names, partnerships, joint ventures, enterprises, investors, property owners, developers, and managers, freelancers, content creators, traders, businessmen, and women, they are all taxable persons and liable to pay tax in Nigeria. Now, the description, characteristics, and examples of persons not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. We have seen persons who are obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, called taxable persons. Let us now look at those who are not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, called non-taxable persons. In a broad view, the following person is not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. A person who does not carry out an economic activity in Nigeria, either by actual means or by derivative means, is not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. And some of the persons are persons who receive upkeep funds, such as students, persons who receive reimbursement for out-of-pocket expenses, persons who receive pocket money, a non-resident person who derives only passive income from investment in Nigeria. They are not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. Definition, description, and uses of tax ID, the primary product of tax registration. The key product of tax registration is tax ID. The key product of tax registration is a tax ID. Section 4(1) of NTAA 2025 states that every taxable person shall register with the relevant tax authority and obtain a taxpayer identification, that's tax ID, for the purpose of compliance with tax obligations. So you can quickly see, clearly see the end product of your registration as stated by Section 4. This means that the tax ID is the key product of tax registration in Nigeria. However, tax ID is a key identity number or document that you need to complete the process of tax registration with a tax authority, meaning that when you retrieve your tax ID, that's not the end of tax registration. The process continues with your relevant tax authority. Definition of tax ID by Nigerian Revenue Service. Please pay attention as the authority is telling you what tax ID is. That's Nigerian Revenue Service. For clarity and better understanding, the Nigerian Revenue Service (NRS) defines a tax identification number, tax ID, as a unique number jointly issued by the Nigerian Revenue Service and the Joint Revenue Board in accordance with Nigerian tax laws for the purpose of identifying individuals and entities for tax administration, compliance, and enforcement. Under Nigeria's tax administration framework, a tax ID is not created in isolation. It is derived from and linked to officially recognized foundational identity systems, including National Identification Number (NIN), issued by the National Identity Management Commission (NIMC) for individuals, Corporate Affairs Commission (CAC) registration records for companies, business names, partnership, and incorporated trustees, other legally recognized identity records for non-residents and special entities. This linkage ensures that every tax ID corresponds to a verified legal identity, improving accuracy, integrity, and trust in Nigerian tax system. By anchoring tax IDs to foundational identity systems, the tax authority is able to do the following. Please pay attention again. Ensure one tax ID per person or entity. Prevent duplication, fraud, and identity mismatch. Enable seamless interaction with banks, employers, regulators, and government agencies. Supports efficient tax assessment, filing, and compliance monitoring. Now, the distinction between tax ID and tax identification number (TIN). The distinction between tax ID and TIN. Please note that tax ID and tax identification number (TIN) are the same. Just that FIRS used to issue TIN before 1st January 2026. However, from 1st January 2026, the Nigerian Revenue Service and the Joint Revenue Board jointly issue tax ID. It is also incorrect to continue to use the name or term TIN or tax identification number after 1st January 2026 because Section 4 of NTAA 2025 specifically called it tax identification tax ID. Please note that there is no number or TIN in Section 4 of NTA 25. There's nothing like tax identification number. Section 4 simply says tax identification or tax ID. It's important you know this. Uses of tax ID. Tax ID is only pathway or link between the taxpayer and the relevant tax authority. Meaning without a tax ID, you cannot engage, correspond, communicate, or in any way relate with the relevant tax authority. Tax ID is actually your access code to tax authorities and their portals. It is a number that identifies you tax-wise. Without it, You are unknown to relevant tax authority, as our friends, the learned people, will say. Specifically, Section 8 of NTA 25 stipulates that the uses of tax ID are as follows. So, specifically, Section 8 of NTA 25 stipulates that the uses of tax ID are as follows. Please pay attention. Tax ID shall be stated on a return, every notice, every correspondence or document submitted, lodged, or used for the purpose of tax compliance. Stated on every document prepared, produced, issued, or submitted in respect of a transaction and is a condition for entering into a contract with any federal or state ministry, department, or agency and local government, and even with any other taxable person. Important note on operationality of tax ID. Automatic assignment of tax ID. Tax ID is now automatically assigned to taxable persons. Once the National Identity Management Commission, NIMC, issues you a National Identification Number, NIN, the Nigerian Revenue Service and Joint Revenue Board Tax ID system automatically assigns a unique tax ID to you. Similarly, once the Corporate Affairs Commission, CAC, issues you a common registration number, RC number, or BN number, the Nigerian Revenue Service and Joint Revenue Board Tax ID system automatically assigns you a unique tax ID to your company. Consequently, you don't do anything about tax ID. You only retrieve a tax ID from the Nigerian Revenue Service Joint Revenue Board Tax ID portal, as we shall see in part 2 of this tax subject. We'll show you when we get to part 2. Please make sure you see part 2. Issuance, notification of refusal, applicant registration, or presumptive registration of tax ID. Section 8 of NTA states that the relevant tax authority shall, upon receiving request, register and issue a tax ID to every taxable person. It is important, it's very key that the relevant tax authority has to register you and issue you, and where it doesn't, it will give you reasons as we will see below. Where a relevant tax authority refuses to register or issue a tax ID upon request under Section 1 of Section 8 of NTA 2025, the relevant tax authority shall, within 5 working days of the decision, notify that person or the refuser with reasons. A relevant tax authority may, based on the information available to it, register and issue a tax ID to a person who should apply for a tax ID, but fail to do so, a forceful issuance of tax ID, you will say. The relevant tax authority shall promptly notify a person registered and issue a tax ID under subsection 3 of Section 8 of the Nigerian Tax Administration Act 2025 of the registration and tax ID. Non-multiplicity and non-transferability of tax ID. A taxable person having a valid tax ID shall not apply for or be issued with another tax ID. Tax ID is unique and it is singular. A person who discovers that a taxable person has multiple tax ID shall promptly report to the relevant tax authority for unification. You can't have more than one tax ID. A tax ID issued to one taxable person is not transferable or usable by another taxable person. Suspension, deregulation, and cancellation of tax ID. Section 10 of Nigerian Tax Administration Act states that where a taxable person temporarily ceases to carry on a trade or business in Nigeria, the taxable person shall notify the relevant tax authority of its intention to suspend its registration for tax purposes within 30 days of such temporary cessation of trade or business. The relevant tax authority shall classify the tax ID as dormant, just like the bank do, and place it on suspension. Where a taxable person permanently ceases to carry on a trade or business in Nigeria, the taxable person shall notify the relevant tax authority of its intention to deregister for tax purposes within 30 days of such cessation of trade or business. Where a taxable person permanently ceases to carry on a trade or business, the relevant authority shall they register the tax ID. The relevant tax authority shall deregister or cancel a tax ID where it is certified that the taxable person is deceased, or in the case of a body corporate, including a government ministry, department, or agency, is wound up or dissolved, and a person to whom the tax ID was issued has another one. A taxable person whose tax ID has been suspended shall, upon reapplication, be reissued with the same tax ID. This confirms to you that your tax ID is unique to you for life. Nobody else takes it. More incisive and critical information about tax ID. This tax ID is very important and crucial, so that you need to deepen your understanding of what it is all about. And this is why we are taking much time to discuss it. And this is why we're providing you with more information as we can. We hope you don't mind, right? So, more information. Every entity or company, whether out of pipeline or still in the pipeline, has a tax ID. Just that some may not have been activated or retrieved. Just like for individuals, any unborn child has a tax ID. Tax ID is unique for every entity and others who are registered with CAC RC number. Tax ID cannot be duplicated or multiplied, just one for every entity. Tax ID is not transferable. Every entity has its own. Tax ID is an identification number for identifying tax matters. Essentially, applying for a tax ID means retrieving or activating a tax ID because it's already there for you. Retrieving or activating a tax ID is free, no cost. You don't pay money, please. The general rule is that taxable persons apply for or retrieve tax IDs. However, a tax authority can issue a tax ID to a person who never applied for a tax ID but who should have done so. Tax ID is mandated to be stated on documents used for tax purposes. A tax authority shall suspend a tax ID, particularly where there is a temporary cessation. A tax authority shall deregister or cancel a tax ID, particularly where there is a permanent cessation, winding up, or dissolution of the entity. A tax authority shall deregister or cancel a tax ID, particularly where the holder is deceased. A tax ID is different from other identification numbers such as birth certificate, NIN, BVN, CACRC or BVN number, bank account number. It is totally different from all these identification numbers. Key implications and benefits of for timely and proper registration for tax in Nigeria. There are numerous implications and benefits for timely and proper registration for tax in Nigeria. However, the key ones are, please pay attention, it's a long list of benefits and implications. Just pay attention here. You have complied. When you register for tax timely and properly, it means you have complied with a major section, a major obligation, a major requirement of Nigerian Tax Act 2025. You will not incur sanctions or penalties for non-registration. You have obtained Nigerian Tax Access Code, and therefore you are good to go with the Nigerian taxation. You can now boldly and proudly walk about Nigeria without fear. You can boldly and proudly walk about in Nigeria without fear. Relevant tax authorities and the Nigerian nation will know you and recognize you as a person and not a quantity that occupies valuable space in Nigeria. You are now a genuine, strong member of the civilized and ethical society. You no longer need to be panicking and hiding away from tax authorities. You can now boldly and proudly do your business. You can now correspond with relevant tax authorities, communicate with them, engage with them. You can now legally and effectively access the portals of tax authorities. You can now obtain the numerous tax authorities, the numerous tax incentives in the Nigerian Tax Act. Remember, we identified about 110 of them, 110 tax incentives. So once you register, you can be able to access those tax incentives. You can now go ahead, process and obtain your tax clearance certificate. You can now obtain the requisite document that you need to conduct your business, travel, and do some other regulatory things. You can now obtain the requisite document that you need to process important licenses, certificates, and permits, such as building permits, certificate of occupancy, business operating license, and permits, which without registration, you cannot own a house in Nigeria, for instance. You can now strongly transact or engage government and its MDS. You can now go ahead and comply with other provisions of the tax laws. You will have to file tax returns as and when due, monthly and annually. I repeat, going forward, you will have to file tax returns as and when due, monthly and annually. Going forward, you will have to charge, collect, and remit output VAT on all your sales or services and keep documentary evidence. Going forward, you will have to pay input VAT on all supplies and utilities made to you, and you have to keep documentary evidence. You will have to deduct tax at source, also called withholding tax, and remit same before the 21st day of the subsequent month to relevant tax authority. You will have to keep proper accounting records in accordance with the Company and Other Matters Act as amended. You will have to keep proper accounting records in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework, such as International Financial Reporting Standard or IFSAS. You have to prepare proper financial reports in accordance with applicable financial reporting frameworks such as IFRS or IFSAS and Nigerian regulations. You will have to get your financial reports audited by a certified independent auditor and submit same to CAC, Nigerian Revenue Service, and other regulatory bodies like Financial Reporting Council. You can be sure that banks can now listen to your request for financial support and facility. You have to keep abreast of tax development to know what is happening. And most importantly, you will have to relate with Taxcorp as your very reliable friend and consultant on tax matters and beyond. Consequences, sanctions and penalties for failure to register for tax timely and properly in Nigeria. In the last slide, you saw the implication and benefits of timely registration for tax in Nigeria. Didn't you feel good about the benefits? Didn't they feel like, didn't you like them? So if you like them, go ahead, register and enjoy yourself. However, if you fail to register as and when due, severe consequences await you. Firstly, you will not obtain any of the benefits mentioned above and release any of the numerous tax incentives in the new Nigerian tax Act, of which we identified over 110 of them. Secondly, Section 101 of Nigerian Tax Administration Act states that a taxable person who fails, please watch this, a taxable person who fails or refuses to register for tax under Section 4 of this Act shall be liable to pay an administrative penalty of, now, just listen, 50,000 naira in the first month in which the failure occurs, and 25,000 naira for each subsequent month in which the failure continues. This penalty could be huge and really unnecessary. First year is a total of 600,000 naira. Second year is a total of 1.2 million naira. Third year is a total of 1.8 million naira, and so forth progressively. Other consequences are shown below. You cannot interact, communicate, or correspond formally with the tax authorities. You are unknown to the tax authorities, and therefore they can't vouch for you or provide you with reference, as when you go to the embassy or some other places for travel or some business. Nobody, the tax authority cannot vouch for you. You cannot do business with a person who has a tax ID. Contravention of this provision attracts an administrative penalty of 5 million naira per transaction on you. So if you do business with anybody who doesn't have a tax ID, you pay 5 million per transaction. And if somebody does business with you when you don't have a tax ID, the person pays 5 million naira per transaction. You cannot open an account with a bank or conduct financial transactions with financial institutions such as insurance, fintech, similar companies, etc. You cannot do business with government or bid or secure contracts from government and their ministries, departments, and agencies. You are a stranger to law. You cannot obtain any of the 110 tax incentives which Taxcorp had identified in the new Tax Act. You do not have the statutory capacity to perform obligations imposed by the Tax Act, such as remittance of paid deductions, collection and remittance of VAT, deduction and remittance of withholding tax. You cannot obtain tax clearance certificates, which you require for your business transactions, travels, holidays, etc. You do not have the statutory capacity to carry out economic activities with tax registered entities such as educational institutions, cooperative societies, etc. You will not be in the good books of the tax authorities and government. Here, the two types of taxable persons and the relevant tax authorities. There are two broad types or categories of taxable persons. The first is incorporated entities, and the second is unincorporated entities. Under incorporated entities, you have two subdivisions. You have incorporated companies and you have corporate entities and others. And under unincorporated entities, again, you have two subdivisions. You have individuals and you have non-individuals, who are also called unincorporated entities. So under incorporated entities, where you have incorporated companies and corporate entities, incorporated companies include limited liability companies, public limited liability companies, PLC, corporation sole, limited companies by shares, by guarantee. Then corporate entities include educational institutions, religious organizations, charitable organizations, corporate societies, society associations, clubs, non-resident employees, armed forces, diplomatic corps. So these two are under incorporated entities, and incorporated entities are under the jurisdiction of the Nigerian Revenue Service. So when it comes to unincorporated entities, like we said, there are two subdivisions, individuals and sub and non-individuals, also called unincorporated entities. So individuals, you have employees, resident employees and non-resident employees, expatriates, employees. You have resident employees. Expatriates are under the jurisdiction of the Nigerian Revenue Service, but resident employees are under the jurisdiction of the State Internal Revenue Services and the Federal Capital Territory Internal Revenue Service. So you also have self-employed individuals apart from employees. You have sole traders, market traders, partners, freelancers, consultants, contractors, families, executor trust, what do you call the other people? Content creators. They are all under self-employed individuals. And on the flip side, you have non-individuals. These are businessmen, enterprises, sole proprietorship, partnership, nano businesses, micro businesses, small businesses, medium businesses. They are all under state internal revenue services and the FCT IRS. For each of them, you have they are further divided into two groups: resident taxable persons and non-resident taxable persons. So under incorporated companies, for instance, you have resident incorporated companies and non-resident incorporated companies. Under corporate entities, you have resident corporate entities and non-resident corporate entities. Just like you have individuals who are resident here and those who are not resident here, like expatriates. So let's do a quick explanation of the two types of taxable personnel and the relevant tax authorities. Taxable person. A taxable person in Nigeria is, let's refresh your mind again, let's know your memory, that a taxable person is every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, whether or not for profit or gain. Whether once you carry out an economic activity, whether it is for profit or gain, you are what? A taxable person. Now let's compare an incorporated entity with an unincorporated entity so that we can understand them better. Because before we move into who or what is a resident incorporated entity, let us first understand what is an incorporated entity. Then before we now talk of whether it is resident or non-resident. So here are four columns. The first one is the serial numbering. The second one is the subject. The third one is incorporated entity. And the fourth column is unincorporated entity. So we just take it step by step, one by one. The first one is definition. So let's define incorporated entity. After that, we now define unincorporated entity. An incorporated entity, i.e., is a legal artificial entity formed by persons, created and registered by law, with a perpetual life that is separate and distinct from those who formed it. On the flip side, an unincorporated entity, UE, is a natural person created by God or a legal artificial entity formed by persons, created and registered by law, with a life which is the same as those of its owners. Item 2, nature of entity. An incorporated entity is a legal artificial entity. Though an artificial entity, it is recognized by law as an entity and which is distant from its founders or owners. On the other hand, an unincorporated entity, UE, is a natural person created by God or an artificial entity recognized by law, but which is not distant from its founders or owners. Item 3, number 3, founding. An incorporated entity is formed by persons as owners, while an unincorporated entity is created by God or formed by persons as owners. Number 4, creation and incorporation. An incorporated entity is created and registered by law. An unincorporated enterprise is created by God or created by registration or created or registered by law. Number 5, type of life. An incorporated entity has perpetual life, which is separate and distinct from those who formed it. An unincorporated entity life is the same as those of its owners, not different. Number 6, legal view. In the eyes of the law, an incorporated entity is a separate and distinct person, very separate. In the eyes of the law, an unincorporated entity is not separate and distinct from the people who formed it. Presence of veil. There is veil between an incorporated entity and its owners. There is veil. But there is no veil between a UE and its owners. Number 8, extent of responsibility for decisions. Everything done, every decision and action taken by an incorporated entity is wholly that of the incorporated entity. On the other hand, everything done, every decision taken by an unincorporated entity is wholly that of the unincorporated entity and its owners, whether they are there or not, whether they know about the decision or not, they are part of that decision. Responsibility for actions. An incorporated entity is wholly responsible for all its actions. It does not concern the owners. But an unincorporated entity and its owners are collectively responsible for all actions taken by the unincorporated entity. Number 10, limited liability. The liability of owners of an incorporated entity is limited. It is limited to the number of shares or is limited to the guarantee, amount of guarantee. The liability of owners of unincorporated entity is not limited, is unlimited. What the law says is unlimited by totally unlimited. So, number 11, recourse to owners' personal assets. If an incorporated entity cannot pay its debt or meet its obligations, it does not consign the personal assets of its owners and vice versa. They are not interested, they are not part of it. It is totally that of the incorporated entity. But on the other hand, if an unincorporated entity cannot pay its debt or meet its obligations, the personal assets of its owners are called in to pay the debts and vice versa. So you have to be careful when you are choosing the type of company that you want to run, either an incorporated entity or an unincorporated entity. For incorporated entity, the liability is limited because the company is a separate entity recognized by law. But in unincorporated entity, liability is not limited. If anything goes wrong, if things go very well, you take all the profit. But if things go bad, they will call you in. So 12, perpetual legal existence. An incorporated entity has perpetual legal existence, which is totally separate and distinct from its owners. Consequently, the exit, sale of their shares, or passing away do not affect the existence of the incorporated entity. On the other hand, an unincorporated entity has no perpetual legal existence, separate and distinct from its owners. Consequently, the exit, sale of their ownership, or passing away affects the existence of the unincorporated entity. Sometimes once the owner dies, the company dies, unlike that of incorporated entity. Liability to pay tax. Incorporated entities are assessed and pay tax in their names. On the other hand, unincorporated entities are assessed and pay tax in the names of their owners as human traders, partners, joint ventures. And lastly, 14, relevant tax authority. The relevant tax authority for incorporated entities are Nigerian Revenue Service, while the relevant tax authority for unincorporated entities are State Internal Revenue Services or Federal Capital Internal Revenue Service. So here we come to the end, and before we leave, I want to refresh your memory of who is Taxcorp and the principal consultant. Taxcorp is a Nigerian tax consulting firm which specializes in tax matters. Prince Chid, FCA, FCT, and MBA is a principal consultant. Prince Chid is a licensed fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, ICAN, and the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, CITN. Taxcorp and Prince Chid have provided tax services to numerous individuals and corporate bodies in both the public and private sectors, locally and internationally, since 1990. That's over 3 decades. The beneficiaries include the Nigerian Revenue Service, NRS, formerly the Federal Revenue Service, FRS, Revenue Mobilization, Allocation, and Fiscal Commission, which they call RAMFAC, the Internal Revenue Services, Lagos, Kano, Abia, and so many other places. Federal Capital Territory Internal Revenue Service, FTTRS, and many private companies and individuals. So you have the contact details of Taxcorp. Should you have any issue that you want to discuss or you want to contribute, you can drop it in the comment section or access Taxcorp through any of our contact details as shown below. Thank you so much.